for joining us. Today's program is sponsored by the ABA's Commission on Immigration and the Section of Civil Rights and Social Justice, or CRSJ. This program is being recorded as part of CRSJ's series called How Things Work, the Legal Edition, which is a rapid response project that addresses how our civil rights are being impacted by actions being taken by the current administration. My name is Laura Peña. I am the director of ProBAR, the ABA's Asylum project located on the southern Texas-Mexico border. I've been practicing immigration law for about 12 years. And I'm thrilled to welcome you to this conversation. These videos are a unique opportunity to address what is happening in America today, clarify any misinformation or disinformation being spread, and how civil rights and social justice advocates can act to protect human and civil rights. Today's topic, rapid response to immigration raids, is more critical than ever. As we confront increased ICE enforcement and more brazen enforcement tactics, it's essential to examine how these issues intersect with the principles of justice and equity that guide our work and the ABA generally. We're honored to have with us here Homero Lopez, the co-founder and legal director at ISLA and former Board of Immigration Appeals member. Homero's expertise and dedication to the equitable application of immigration law and removal defense has made him a leader in the field. We are grateful for his willingness to share his insights with us. So without further ado, Homero, let's jump in.
Thank you, Laura.
Absolutely. Can you tell us a bit about what's happening with ICE enforcement in the nation, and if you have any observations based on where you're at today?
Yeah. Unfortunately, we've seen an incredible increase in ICE enforcement around the country. Here in New Orleans, we haven't seen as much. Here in New Orleans, it's been a little bit more targeted, going to work sites, identifying particular work sites. But as we've seen around the country and as we've seen in the news, ICE across the country has been focusing on rounding people up across the country, where finding them in basically any space, right? In public spaces, going into apartment buildings, going to schools, basically going to large Latino populated areas and arresting people based off of what they look like or what they are assuming means that they are undocumented immigrants. And it's been a massive increase, and it's an incredible threat to all of our civil rights.
Thanks, Homero. If you could speak a little bit to which population, who are these raids impacting the most, in your opinion?
Yeah. They're primarily impacting workers. So construction workers. We're seeing a lot of these raids taking place at construction sites. A lot of these raids taking place in the parking lots of Home Depots or Lowe's. And we're seeing a lot of them also taking place in restaurants or against street vendors in places like Los Angeles and in New York. We're seeing ICE going to these particular areas. And part of what they're using as their excuse or their rationale is they're looking for Spanish-speaking people who look Latino, which is always an interesting issue to me, given that I don't know exactly what a Latino look is, but that's what they're using, and unfortunately have been partially sanctioned to do so by the Supreme Court in a decision earlier this year. And so who we're seeing having the most effect or the most consequence of this are Latinos in the U.S. That has included U.S. citizens. There was a recent ProPublica report that came out. Over 170 U.S. citizens have been detained by ICE during these types of raids and during these types of arrests, where they're indiscriminately rounding people up in certain areas or people who look a certain way, that they are themselves, or ICE is authorizing themselves, saying that these folks are undocumented and therefore ICE has the authority to arrest them.
Extremely troubling, Homero. You mentioned that could be discriminatory in its application, how they're going about this. It's how you look, what type of job you have, how you talk. So, but underneath all of this, what is the legal authority that ICE has to arrest somebody, whether it's in the street or at a private business? in their car? What do they use here?
Yeah. So ICE has the authority to arrest people who are in the United States without permission or who have overstayed their visas. If you have a certain type of status, depending on the status, I'm not going to get into the weeds necessarily, but if you've committed a crime or if you've violated your status in some way, they have the right to arrest you. They have, however, those arrests are supposed to be targeted. They're supposed to be particularly identifying who they're going after. They need to have a warrant or they need to have a reason to believe that this person is the person they're looking for. And so when we're talking about in public spaces, they need to have some kind of what the government, try not to get into too many like formal legal terms, but what is called reasonable articulable suspicion, right? They have to have something that tells them that an immigration law has been violated. And as I stated earlier, what they're basically using, the reasons that they are saying, what they are saying they have that gives them the suspicion of the person is the person's work, the person's look, whether they speak, how they speak English, or if they don't speak English, what area of the city they're in or the town that they happen to be in is that frequented by immigrants or undocumented immigrants in particular. And so those are the types of factors that they're considering because they have to be able to express some factor. Now, typically and historically, the Supreme Court has said race cannot be really that factor. You can't go and look at people based off of a racial perspective or use race as the primary factor why to detain somebody. They seem to be saying this time around, never mind, that's okay for immigration purposes. We'll see where that case ends up going. It's eventually going to be addressed in full by the Supreme Court. It's been addressed in a small part by the Supreme Court so far. Those rights, though, that people have, even if you are arrested, you can still remain silent. And I think we'll get into that a little bit more. But that's in public. They can approach people in public and ask them questions, generally with this very minimal suspicion of the person having committed a crime or having committed some kind of immigration violation. In somebody's car, you have a little bit more protection if you're in your car. They have to now have the reason they're stopping you has to be more. They have to either you committed some kind of vehicular violation and you're being stopped for that reason. ICE generally can't be stopping people in cars, though. They don't have authority to make traffic stops. So, again, they have to be able to articulate what it is that is an immigration violation as to why they're targeting the person in the car. And when you're inside your home, you have the most protection. When you're inside your home, they have to present a judicial warrant to be able to enter the home. They have to identify the home that they're going to, identify who they're looking for, and be able in order to be able to enter your home. And you have, again, it has to be a judicial warrant. If you let them in, then you're giving up your rights and you're letting them in. At a workplace, it's really the employer can let them in. And again, they usually workplace raids in their traditional form are carried out after months long investigation. There are warrants, there's reasons that ICE has to go in. What we're seeing right now is they're basically breaking into businesses or just going into businesses and starting to round people up. And that's unlawful. And that's something that they need to be held accountable for.
Thanks, Homero. So you've described this really broad standard, right? That for now, the Supreme Court has greenlit, right? How you look, how you talk, type of job you have. And you've talked a little bit about whether you're in the public, right? You're on a sidewalk, whether you're inside a vehicle, inside your home, or at your place of business. And the level of privacy rights varies, right? But let's move a little further. Say, all right, ICE has approached an individual, they're being arrested. Okay, maybe they were pulled over in a vehicle by their local cops. Their local cops pull them over for a broken taillight. Very common, right? And the local cop calls ICE or Border Patrol or National Guard in some instances, right? So
Mhm.
DEA, a lot of law enforcement agencies are now conducting immigration enforcement. Okay, so what type of rights should people keep in mind when they are, okay, they've had that encounter and it seems like they're going to be arrested?
Yeah. Your primary right, the top one that we repeat and we try to ingrain in clients as much as possible is you have the right to be silent. And when we say you have the right to be silent, we really mean just stop talking. Hardly has anybody speaking up helped them very much in a legal proceeding. Words get twisted, things get shifted, and so shutting up, for lack of a better word, is your main defense at that moment. It's take your moment, don't respond. You don't have to answer any questions. If you get pulled over and you're driving a car, you have to present your ID. You have to present your driver's license, right? You're driving a car, you've put yourself in that situation. If they approach you in the street, you can ask them, do I have the right to leave? Am I free to leave? And if the response is no, then that means that in that moment you are detained and you should stop talking. And then if they say yes, you can very kindly say, thank you, don't want to speak to you today, and keep on walking because you're free to leave. You do not have to speak. That is, you don't have to. That's the number one thing, is remaining silent. If you do really feel the urge that you have to speak, say that you want an attorney, and then go back to being silent, right? The words that should be coming out of your mouth are, I want to speak to my attorney. I want my attorney present. I won't answer questions without an attorney. I want an attorney. And so that's what you want to be. If you are going to speak, those are the type of things you do want to be saying. But generally remain silent. Obviously, what we've seen is people being tackled, people being, beaten. Those kinds of things are terrible. And in those situations, it's difficult for people to remain silent or to, not fight back. I understand. But that is, from a legal perspective, what you can do is remain silent. You also have the right to an attorney. And so you ask them that you want to see your attorney and then remain silent. You again, you're talking about in a situation once they've already been detained. If they're at your house, you have the right to not let them in. You can deny letting them in. If you're an employer and they don't have a warrant or any, judicial order saying that they can enter your place of business, you also don't have to let them in. You can refuse to let them in and to speak to your staff, and that's a way of protecting your staff as an employer. But if you're an individual, the main defense at that point is really being able to remain silent, and asking for a lawyer and wanting to speak with a lawyer.
All right. Yeah. Important to keep that at the forefront of your mind. So let's take it a little further, right? So, okay. Unfortunately, let's say an individual has that ICE encounter, is arrested. Maybe they're staying silent. They're asking for the lawyer. What should they expect? What happens next after an arrest by ICE?
You'll be taken to the nearest, usually to the nearest ICE office, and they'll process. They'll take your fingerprints. They'll ask you a bunch of questions. Again, you don't have to answer any of those questions. They'll put you into the system, and then they'll likely send you to an immigration detention center. And at the immigration detention center, you'll be given a document that's called a notice to appear, where where the government is using the allegations against you or laying out the allegations against you and whatever they're charging you with. And you'll eventually get a court hearing where you get to go in front of an immigration judge and respond to those charges. If, however, you have, a previous order of removal, or there are certain circumstances where people who entered within the last 2 years are going to be subject to something that's called expedited removal, which means they don't have to take you to immigration court. They can quickly deport you. Then you'll essentially be getting processed to be physically removed from the country.
All right. So it could happen a little slower, or it could happen pretty quickly.
Yeah, depending on the context
Depending on the
and
situation.
your individual circumstances. Yeah.
It's all very individualized. All right. Homero, can you talk a little bit about What are some of the remedies? What can people do if they feel like even the initial arrest was unlawful or unfair? I mean, I was in our local detention center here last week, and a woman was pulled over for speeding, but she was literally driving out of the parking lot at a grocery store. You know, you don't
Mhm.
speed when you're just coming out of a parking lot, right?
Yeah.
And so what should people be thinking about if they feel like the arrest lacked any basis?
Yeah. The reason why we say remain silent is because an attorney can help you argue and what in legal terms is called suppression. We can, keep certain information from coming into the trial, and so then the government cannot use that against you. And so if it was done unlawfully, the government can make an argument as to why it cannot be used, or the attorney can make an argument as to why the government cannot use that evidence against you. And that's really the main remedy. There are civil remedies where you could sue if your civil rights have been violated. If you're a U.S. citizen and you presented, a passport or a real ID or something that shows that you're a U.S. citizen, and they still arrested you, there's going to be an argument there to be making an argument for damages and getting paid as a result of your civil rights having been violated.
All right, so there are legal options. The law still exists. And
Correct.
we're here to remind people that there are options when you feel like the enforcement tactics or your specific situation was just truly, unfair or egregious, or you just want to fight it, right? Have your
Yes.
due process, right? The law is in place for a reason. Homero, you talked about US citizens getting arrested. Can
Mhm.
you speak a little bit, I think maybe for US citizens or for non-US citizens who sometimes have US citizen children?
Yeah.
And how does citizenship come into play in these ICE enforcement raids? What should people be thinking about?
Yeah. So ICE has absolutely no jurisdiction, no right to arrest, no right to do anything to a U.S. citizen. Right. Their power is limited to the enforcement of immigration laws and arresting people who have violated immigration law. A U.S. citizen cannot violate immigration law because they're a U.S. citizen, and therefore there's no basis for ICE to do anything with it. So if someone is a U.S. citizen, this might be one of the few exceptions when I would say speak, right? Tell them you are a US citizen, because as they act, every time they don't believe you, or every time they act after you have either told them or presented them with some kind of evidence of your citizenship, that leads to further action on their end, ignoring your status and the rights, and further violating your rights. When it comes to people who are not citizens but do have U.S. citizen children, one of the things we oftentimes talk with our clients is making plans. Obviously, we don't want to think about being in a situation where our children go to work, they come home, and mom, dad, whoever it is that's caring for them is not there. But unfortunately, the world we live in, this happens way too often. And making a plan ahead of time, who do the kids call? Who's going to be in charge? Working that through with the family so that the family knows, and the family friend or whoever it is that's going to take the children is aware and planning for that as well. Having U.S. citizen family members can also help you in your immigration case, though, whether that be because they can petition for you to get your status, or in removal proceedings. Once you're in immigration court, there are certain forms where you can apply to get status by having U.S. citizens here in the U.S.
Thank you, Homero. Extremely important points. To everyone who joined us today, I want to thank you for being part of this important dialogue. We're seeing the issue of immigration enforcement raids happening across the country, and we are here to provide accurate information to try and dispel myths and to make sure that we can all come together and have a dialogue about how we can take steps together to make progress. Remember, the work doesn't stop here. It continues with actions that we take in our own communities, in our own workplaces, and within the ABA. Homero, I want to thank you for your time, for your expertise, all of the work that you're doing in Louisiana, in and out of all of those ICE detention centers. You're doing, heroic work, and we're extremely grateful for everything you are doing for the community. I want to encourage everyone here to stay engaged with the ABA's Civil Rights and Social Justice section and become a member if you're not one already. Visit our website, explore upcoming events, and consider joining one of our committees to help shape the work we're doing. You can do so at mbar.org/CRSJ. Thank you again, Homero, and thank you everyone for tuning in.
Thank you.